Hello everyone, and welcome to week 6 of English 121. This week we're going to be talking about theme. We're going to talk in depth about a short story by Flannery O'Connor called A Good Man is Hard to Find. You're going to be reading several selections, just the first beginning and ending information about theme in chapter 6 and the video on theme. I'd like you to review that, and I'd like you to closely read A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor. I found a really amazing link to an audio recording of Flannery O'Connor herself reading this short story. This is rare because she died at age 39 and didn't give a lot of readings due to the fact that she had lupus and wasn't able to travel a lot. So enjoy it. I listened to it and it's spectacular. It's neat to hear it in her voice. But please read along with the text in front of you. It'll really help you find, underlying things and actively read it as you're listening to her read it to you. Then we're going to have a conversation about theme in A Good Man is Hard to Find. I'll introduce the first formal writing assignment for our class, and it'll go live. It's not due until March 12th, though. Don't panic yet. And you'll begin working on that paper as part of your reflection journal this week. You're going to complete your pre-writing. All right, so let's start by talking about the idea of theme. Before you listen to this lecture, I highly encourage you to read A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor and listen to the recording. Because I think it'll really help you to at least have one of the readings of this story under your belt as we talk about it. When you find the theme in a story, it's a lot more than just looking at the plot. Theme is something. It's the underlining idea in a story. If you go back to how we were talking about the fables that we read in the first week, a lot of the themes or the morals were implicit, very easy to find. In literary fiction, a theme is a little bit more difficult to find, and you have to read very closely to find it, and there can be several different answers to what a theme can mean. But it's the general idea or insight that this story reveals. And it's one of the most amazing things to read for in a story, because you need to use all of the tools we've been using up to this point in order to really find that theme and find evidence to support that theme. So I think a story that's really well crafted, like A Good Man is Hard to Find by Flannery O'Connor, is a great example of how to really pull out the details of the story that reveal a theme, and it's a great story to work on because there's so much there. It's just like working on Sonny's Blues. It's such a well-crafted story that you can mine it and continually find new amazing details to support your reading of the story. So let's look at A Good Man is Hard to Find a little bit more closely. If we look back first at, one of the first ways to think about theme is to think about the title of the story. Before you read the story, hopefully you thought about what the title could mean and where it's from. But after you've read the story, you want to think back on it to understand why the author chose this title and what it has to do with the actual occurrences that happen in this story. So in the case of A Good Man is Hard to Find, is this title mentioned throughout the story? You certainly can point to several instances in this story where the title resurfaces. The first time is when the grandmother's talking to Red Sam in the restaurant, and they're discussing, how nowadays, a good man is hard to find, right? And then when she finally meets the misfit, there's an interaction between the grandmother and the misfit about whether or not he is a good man. And it's something that gets repeated. And if something's repeated in a story, you should pay attention to it. Just like if a gun appears in a story, you should pay attention to it because it's often going to go off, right? So, another really important thing to think about is to see how the main character changes over the course of the story. Does the main character, and in this case, the protagonist of the story is the grandmother, and whether or not she's a reliable character or unreliable, that's up to you. There's a lot of evidence to suggest that she's not, and there's a lot of evidence to suggest that she is. So she's a very interesting character because she has these moments where she forgets things, right? Like where the house is that she's trying to take the family to, or why, it takes her a while to recognize the misfit, or she can't remember why she can recognize, that the Hawaiian shirt with the birds on it when the men come back from the woods. She's forgotten that it was her son's shirt. These are really important things to know about her. But what you want to look at in understanding theme is how she changes over the course of the story. What is she like in the beginning, and what is she like in the last few moments of the story, which happen to be the very last few moments of her life. There's an amazing quote in the last couple lines of the story when the misfit says, "She would have been a good woman if someone would have been there to shoot her every minute of her life." I want you to really think about what this line means. How does it relate to the plot, and how does it relate to the theme as we understand it? How did she progress to that moment? How is she a good woman in that moment of her death? Are there any general observations about human nature in this story? You can definitely answer yes to this one in this story. And one of the themes that comes up is the old, the old South versus New South, and the family dynamics, and how it expresses this tension between the younger generation. You see the children, the grandma's looking out the window at all the sights that she sees, and meanwhile the kids are reading comic books, and she's very concerned with what she looks like on the outside in case they get into an accident, right? She's wearing this nice little pin with violets on it, so that in case her body's found, which ironically turns out to be a good precaution, right? She looks proper, right? That someone who finds her body will know that she was a lady. Whereas the mother is described as looking like a cabbage, right? In the first couple of paragraphs, and she's wearing, she's not dressed up at all. She's just wearing her comfortable house clothes, right? She's got her hair tied up. She's not concerned with having to look proper when she's traveling with her family. And it's really important to think about the tension between these two things. Another vehicle that's really important in this story are the setting, and how it tells the story, how it presses in information about the text. Like in paragraph 80, we see behind them the line of woods gaped like a dark open mouth. So that's pretty ominous, right? And this is just before some of the family is being taken into the woods to be shot. So the woods are saying directly what isn't being said directly in the story. And there's even more. There's so much that's described through the landscape. Even before they get to the lunch restaurant, they pass a large. This is paragraph 24, I believe. They passed a large cotton field with 5 or 6 graves fenced in the middle of it like a small island. "Look at that graveyard," the grandmother said, pointing it out. "That was the old family burying ground. That belonged to the plantation," right? And that puts this image of the old South, right, with this idea of being dead and buried in your own yard, right, which is ironically setting up exactly where her family will be buried together in the woods by the end of the story. So that parallels exactly what's going on. Also, paragraph 45, the town that she wakes up near and has this revelation, this image of the old house come into her mind where they should visit, is called Tombsboro, right? The idea of tomb. She's going to her tomb, right? There's so many instances of this throughout the story, and it's really important to pay attention to it. The other thing you really want to pay attention to is the foreshadowing throughout the story. From the very first paragraph, there is amazing foreshadowing. We learn everything that's going to happen in the entire story in that first paragraph of the story, and that's a bold thing to do as a writer. You have to be a really excellent writer to do something like that. So pay attention as you're reading, as you reread the story, to all of these little details. Let's see, there's one other thing I wanted to bring up. Oh, the imagery, towards, I think it's apparent if you read the biography of that's provided to you about Flannery O'Connor, how religious she was as a person. She once attended Mass every day when she was a child, and you see in her writing this deep connection to Christianity, but even more so this idea of how to attain grace in the face of evil and in the face of great danger. So I think something to pay attention to is when the grandmother, has this moment at the end when she would have been a good woman if someone had been there to shoot her every minute of her life. Was that her moment of grace? Is that what she's saying? That's something to ask yourself. Who has a moment of grace in this story? Is it the misfit? Is it the grandmother? What does that mean? And I want you guys to be thinking about that. All right, so now it's your turn. I've been talking you through this story. I hope you enjoyed getting me to give you a little mini lecture about the story, to get jazzed up about doing your own explication. That's where you find quotations and use them as a way to answer, to really pull out the meaning of the story. So here's some questions for you I'd like you to answer in the conversation. As always, you guys are doing an excellent job discussing these stories by respectfully responding to one another. Keep up the good work. Don't drop out. Keep working at it. I know it's a lot to do, but we're getting ready for our first writing assignment, and this kind of work is really going to get you prepared to write your essay. So, how early in the story does O'Connor foreshadow what will happen in the end? What further hints does she give us along the way? How does the scene at Red Sammy's barbecue advance the story toward its conclusion? When we first meet the grandmother, what kind of person is she? What do her various remarks reveal about her? Does she remain a static character, or does she change in any way as the story goes on? When the grandmother's head clears for an instant, paragraph 136, what does she suddenly understand? That's a really important part of the story. What do we learn from the conversation between the misfit and the grandmother while the others go out to the woods? How would you describe the misfit's outlook on the world? Compare it with the author's from whatever you know about Flannery O'Connor and from the story itself. Remember, you can get more information about Flannery O'Connor in the biography section, but there's also, in chapter 10, there's some great information about Flannery O'Connor, and she even writes about this particular story in a short critical piece on page 458. So I highly recommend reading that. It gives you insight into her actual opinion about this story. All right. So your first formal paper for this class will be writing about fiction. Over the past 6 weeks, you've gained the tools, all of the tools really that you need to effectively analyze a literary short story. So the first thing you're going to do while you prepare for this is to, after you choose your story, and I'll give you a little more information about that in a second, you're going to actively read the story at least twice. That means you're going to read through it for just for comprehension the first time, and the second time you're going to read through really in-depthly. to really figure out what information you can use from the story to support a thesis that you might be building, and we'll talk about that in a second. You want to think about the story. You want to identify the protagonist and the main characters. You want to consider the story's point of view. You want to think about the setting and what it has to do with the rest of the story. You want to notice any key symbols, and we'll be talking about symbols next week. And you want to look for the theme. The theme is going to be really important. You want to complete some pre-writing, and this week's reflection journal, you'll actually be doing that. Then from your pre-writing, you can draft and then go through the revision and editing process. This is going to take place over the next 3 weeks. This week you're going to select the story, you're going to analyze the story and complete your pre-writing activities. So in lieu of a second story, you're going to choose from the selection which story you'd like to read, and on your own you're going to analyze it and complete your pre-writing about it. Then next week you're going to draft your paper, and you're going to participate, it says final paper, you're actually going to be participating in a peer review. And then your final paper will be due on March 12th. So here's your official writing assignment. I'd like you to write an analysis of one of the stories written by Flannery O'Connor in Chapter 10, 2 critical case books, except you can't write about a Goodman, it's hard to find because we're writing about it this week, where you argue a theme. Remember, in order to argue a theme, you're going to have to talk about the other. You're going to argue. Sorry, I can't talk. You're going to use the other parts of the story to explain the theme. Like, how does setting contribute to theme? How does the main character contribute to the theme, or the other characters? You're going to pull the story apart in order to argue a thematic reading of the story. A successful paper will contain a clear thesis statement, logical development, and the use of textual evidence or quotations from the text to back up one's claims. This paper needs to be at least 3 to 4 typed pages in Times New Roman 12-point font. It needs to be in MLA format, and it needs to be uploaded as a Word document. There is some wonderful information on how to format a paper in the back of our book. There are sample papers even, and I will find the exact pages for you. But writing about literature is a great place to start. That's chapter 41 that I mentioned before. It tells you all about how to set up your paper. I think at the end there is a MLA formatted paper, a checklist for revising your draft. Oh yes, here it is. Your sample student paper is found on page 1903, and this is exactly how you should format your paper, including a works cited page. If you've never done MLA format and you need help, please contact me. It's not something I teach in this class because you should have already learned it in 120, but I'm happy to go over it with you if you have any questions and to give you information on how to format your paper. Alright, so this week the last thing you're going to be doing is you're going to be pre-writing about your your paper topic. So you're going to look at the exercises on found on pages 1889 to 1893. This is in chapter 41, writing about literature, and I highly recommend reading this whole chapter. It's a good chapter about how to complete the assignment successfully. There's information on brainstorming, clustering, listing, free writing, journaling, and outlining. So please review this, and it'll help you get ready to do your pre-writing for your paper. That's it for this week. Next week, we will be doing our last week of fiction. We're going to be talking about symbol. So please email me if you have any questions, and I look forward to seeing you online.